like that, and like that. Come on.
Suppose someone came up to you and asked, "Hey, what's that whole Star Wars thing about?" What if they knew about the laser swords, space wizards, and quirky droids, so your answer had to strip away all of that? What would you tell them? We can say that the prequels are about how fear of loss turned a kid who knew nothing of greed into a monster. We can say that the originals are about how a son's compassion redeems his father. Those are the stories of those trilogies, and that's what would get people interested in watching it, even if they already knew about the stylistic and visual elements that Star Wars uses to tell its narrative. When Episode 9 arrives, we'll be able to say something similar about the story contained within all 9 parts. And what will we say? The answer to that is in the interesting relationship that will develop between the mysterious Rey of Jakku and the tormented Kylo Ren. Now, what if I told you that they'll fall in love? You might say, hold on a second, did we even watch the same movie? Did you see him cut down that gentle old man? Order a village massacre?
Kill them all.
Invade Rey's mind? Kill Han Solo, his own father? And I'd say, yeah, but none of that matters because Star Wars is a fairy tale, and it's hopeful, optimistic, and aimed at 12-year-old kids.
You know, it's hard for people to realize, and I'm not supposed to say this, and I wasn't supposed to say it then, but, you know, it's a film for 12-year-olds.
But it brings out the kid in all of us, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it was designed to be a film like mythology of this is what we stand for, you're about to enter the real world.
This romance has the potential to serve as a metaphor for so many aspects of life as to make it almost downright criminal to not use it. And the fact that it seems obvious, even though I'd say most fans aren't expecting it, has nothing to do with the merit of the idea. Because it's not about finding something that's never been said before. It's about saying exactly what you mean to.
You know, a lot of people say, well, but it's so obvious and all this kind of stuff. But in the end, every generation needs to have it said in their own language so that they can, you know, actually take it home with them. And when it comes to the really painful part, you know, later on in life, they kind of maybe think a little bit with their head as much as their heart.
And what society needs to hear, time and time again, is simply, love is the balance. Rey and Kylo Ren are two halves of the Force, destined to come together to forever bring an end to the wars that have plagued the galaxy for 3 generations. In my opinion, this theory has an overwhelming amount of evidence in its favor. We'll have to trim it down a lot, but I want to look at some key elements. Namely the prequels and their parallels with The Force Awakens, some stuff about mythology, and a relatively unknown animated film created by George Lucas called Strange Magic. Let's start with Lucas's animated film, which he had been working on for 15 years, going all the way back to when he was writing the prequels. Strange Magic was released by Touchstone Pictures in January of 2015, the same year that The Force Awakens would hit theaters. It was the first Lucasfilm production to be distributed by Disney following their acquisition of the Star Wars franchise. The story is a romance between Marianne, heir to the Fairy Kingdom, and the Bog King, Lord of the Dark Forest. It's a simple film with a simple message. True love is found between the strangest of people, and one shouldn't mistake infatuation, represented by the primrose flower-derived love potion, with true love, what can only be experienced when 2 people get to know each other and realize they are perfect soulmates. There are some interesting scenes involving the two that parallel some of the scenes we see in The Force Awakens.
Roger, BK.
And here's your boutonniere.
Quickly.
Tell me about the droid.
If Skywalker returns, the new Jedi will rise.
Supreme Leader, I take full responsibility.
You tell him.
Okay. A fairy flew into a forest. What? And almost took a primrose.
A primrose? Destroy the primroses, or I will destroy you. You need a teacher!
Had enough?
I could do this all day.
Yeah, and because you can feel the light on your face, and especially that moment with me and Adam when we were just doing that moment when we're finding the force, whatever. I shouldn't say that, or whatever. Finding the force, because I don't know how to describe it. Finding the force, whatever. I shouldn't say that.
Some other parallels include the Dark Forest and the Fairy Kingdom as being like the dark side and the light, the Bog King's mother who wants him to give up being an evil jackass and fall in love with someone, and the Bog King's views on love and order seen here.
Because love is dangerous. It weakens. It rots. It destroys order. And without order, what is left? Chaos.
By the end of the film, the Bog King and Marianne marry each other, and the tensions between the Dark Forest and the Fairy Kingdom are brought to a peaceful end. We learn during the film that the Bog King is evil and grumpy because he tried to use a love potion on someone and it ended in tears, because the person was already truly in love with someone else. The parallel isn't perfect, but George described Anakin's love of Padme, what inevitably leads him down the path of the dark side, as a possessive kind of love rather than a compassionate kind. We can describe it as close to or the same thing as infatuation. So within Strange Magic, we have a Star Wars saga in miniature format. Someone becomes evil because love didn't go their way, and they become good again because they find their true soulmate. I wanted to start with this because the topic of love is the perfect lead-in to the story of the prequels, which I believe will most heavily inform the story of Rey and Kylo Ren. Because to understand what Kylo and Rey will do right, we have to understand what Anakin and Padme did wrong. I think the prequels are important because I believe that in a good story, Act 3 should be heavily informed by the themes, conflicts, and general ideas introduced in Act 1. And I tend to take George at his word when he says that Star Wars is like poetry. It rhymes. In The Art of the Revenge of the Sith book, Lucas further elaborates by saying, "The Star Wars saga is like a symphony, which has recurring themes." The Force Awakens mimicked the original trilogy so much because it's the chapter that picks up right where we left off. But as we move forward in the saga, we'll see that it begins to bend back and mirror more heavily with the prequels. The final litmus test for this will happen when we see whether or not Episode 9 corresponds most heavily with Episode 1, addressing directly the prophecy of the Chosen One and bringing balance to the Force. Even without the poetic structure at play here, this is just how a lot of good stories unfold, and it makes sense that as Star Wars attempts to be a modern myth, its structure is similar to some of the greatest works of literature, such as the Odyssey, the Bible, and the main Hindu epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. If there is one cardinal rule that Lucasfilm will enforce, even after George's departure, it's this one. This mythopoetic structure will underpin the Skywalker saga, and that saga begins with Anakin and Padme. There would be no Skywalker family without the union of these two important characters, and every problem faced in the next two trilogies is a direct result of the decisions and mistakes that they made. We can trace every mistake Anakin made in the prequels back to the root cause of fear. The broad cycle of this can be seen over the course of Anakin's life. Fear of loss prompts him to make a deal with the devil. This fear leads to anger, this anger leads to hate, and ultimately to suffering. Vader's immolation on Mustafar and following placement in his suit is a play on the motifs of journeying to the underworld or suffering in hell for the crimes he's committed. From the moment he loses Padme, his entire life is one long period of suffering, until that fateful moment when he decides to give up everything to save Luke. Padme was, for most of Anakin's life, the only one who might have been able to save him and bring him back from the dark side. Look at Anakin's eyes carefully in these sequences and note the color changes.
Only my new powers can do that.
At what cost?
Bring balance to the Force!
His eyes are our visual clue of when he feels conflicted. Padme may have nearly been able to bring him back, and then Obi-Wan screws everything up. Anakin's entire tragedy is based on his initial fear of losing Padme, and that fear plunges the galaxy into darkness. So how does this relate to Rey and Kylo? For the mythic instruction book to be complete, the reverse of Anakin and Padme's tragedy, born from the wrong way to love someone, needs to include the opposite lesson. How a compassion-based romance can breed a relationship that is liberating to both partners and allows them to project that compassion outward to others. The original trilogy was showing the story of a child and their parent. The prequels are a don't-do-drugs story of adolescence, and the sequels will be an example of how one should pursue a relationship with another human being after you've left your parents. It's the story of finally becoming an adult. The key theme from the prequels, that fear leads to the dark side, needs to be addressed in the sequels for this story to have any measurable amount of consistency. And that's why this scene is so important. It's after this point that Kylo and Rey know each other's fears and insecurities, something you typically only share with a partner. The novel further clarifies that Kylo Ren is unwilling to unleash his full abilities on Rey because he has compassion for her. Snoke calls him out on this. I suspect a scene similar to this will get worked into the beginning of The Last Jedi. And while on the topic of the interrogation, let's show a bit of Star Wars film poetry.
Don't be afraid.
I'm not afraid to die.
What are you afraid of?
Afraid?
Don't be afraid. I feel it too.
You're afraid.
Each man is clothed in dark, while each woman is in white, which is clear yin and yang symbolism meant to evoke a notion that these two people can balance each other. Each is opposite the other in another way too. Padme was a queen, Anakin a slave. Han was a scruffy-looking, nerf-hurting scoundrel. Leia was a worshipful princess. Rey is a scavenger. Kylo is a dark prince who believes his legacy entitles him to rule over the lesser beings of the galaxy. There's a lot of messages you can draw from this. One person represents our dark sides and its temptations. What we secretly desire and should indulge in from time to time, but keep from gaining control over us. Another represents our noble aspects, striving to help others, having compassion, and all the rest. It should have more power over the other aspect. If selfishness, an aspect of the dark side, starts winning, the light should be there to keep it in check. Padme couldn't do this with Anakin because she wasn't his equal. In the two relationships we've seen thus far, there has been this imbalance in the Force. The Aftermath books show us that it happened with Han, Leia, and Ben too. Han was jealous that Leia had a connection with Ben that he could never have, and I'm sure that factored into his inability to understand his son and eventually had a role in this. And the question of, what if Padme had the Force, is an intriguing one, because that is exactly what we are getting with Rey. This concept art of Rey implies, wait, no, that's concept art of Padme from Revenge of the Sith. This is concept art of Rey. A few of these quotes should spark some interest too. They're from Ian McCaig, who worked on the art of all of the prequels as well as The Force Awakens. She's in love with a monster.
You're a monster.
So I wanted to make her courageous and strong. Like a lioness. There are also clear-cut visual similarities between the design of Rey and the various designs seen for Padme, and it's clear that some of Kylo Ren's evolving visual design elements are meant to mirror Anakin, particularly in Revenge of the Sith. The difference this time will be that the tragedy of Anakin plays in reverse, with Kylo Ren renouncing the dark side because of his romantic attachment to Rey. Some poetic mirrors with the prequels are in order here.
Liar! Traitor!
Personal feelings get in the way.
Careful, Ren, that your personal interests not interfere with orders from Leader Snoke.
The Force Awakens leads us to believe, slowly but surely, that Ren's personal feelings somehow involve Rey.
The two were accompanied by a girl.
What girl? Forget the droid. We have what we need. And the droid?
Ren believed it was no longer valuable to us. That the girl was all we needed.
teacher! I could show you the ways of the Force!
Pull the division out. Forget the droid. We have what we need. The map. You've seen it.
Sir, resistance fighters. We need more troops.
Pull the division out.
That happens when you're being hunted by a creature in a mask.
To add to this, the changes to Kylo's look in The Last Jedi reflect this idea of him being a dark prince. He already has the cross-guarded lightsaber, a group of knights that follow him, and most likely Vader's castle as well. Now his helmet is off, he wears a cape, and a Star Wars version of a black medieval doublet. The whole thing screams King Arthur in space. Rey literally pulls a sword from the stone, signifying her worthiness to be its wielder. This has nothing to do with her having Luke's X chromosome. It has to do with the fact that Anakin should have surrendered all of his power to Padme because she was worthier of it. We see a hint of this in the Clone Wars when Anakin symbolically gives Padme his lightsaber. In the larger scheme of the saga, the middle chapter is always about two lovebirds coming together. In The Last Jedi, Kylo and Rey will, at the very least, join forces as mutual allies working towards some sort of goal. Snoke's guards were probably created to make the moment Kylo joins Rey one of the most iconic action sequences in the saga. The ray of light that shines past Rey onto Kylo foreshadows that she's the only person who can get Ben Solo back on the right path, and it will be because he has unconditional love for her. That's compassion, the binding piece that will maintain the balance between the two of them. This connects with the main theme of symbiosis introduced in Episode 1, and the romance between the light and the dark is the perfect narrative device to illustrate this. And that's the lesson for 12-year-olds. You may stumble and fall along your way to becoming a good person and have a relationship or two that you really screw up with. But if you learn compassion and make that the center of your life, you will discover a connection with others in the world around you that you never thought possible. This is reflected in the Star Wars version of the yin-yang symbol, where there is a center spot for compassion. Without that, you can't find balance or attain wisdom, and you may become the very thing you hoped to destroy. You may ask, why does it need to be a romance? Why not something platonic or familial? And it's because learning to love someone you don't even know unconditionally is one of the strongest ways to demonstrate having learned compassion. Sure, it doesn't have to be a romance, but we're in the third trilogy. It's go big or go home. As for who Rey is in the grand scheme of things, the hints are already there in her resemblance to Padme, but that's a video for another time. I'll leave you with a hint. In your standard myth, the heroes undergo a life, death, and resurrection. If you stuck with me this long, thank you so much for watching. This video was the result of at least 40 hours of editing and writing. Because of that, I've decided to make this video the one in which I launch a Patreon account. If you enjoy this kind of discussion related to Star Wars, which I hope you aren't getting anywhere else, please consider donating $1 per video. I can't commit to a release schedule due to real-life obligations, which is why I decided to make the pledging work per video rather than per month. And of course, if you want to see more of this content, please subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.